Thank you so much. I'm going to be moderating a discussion. We will come and we will be asking you for some questions as well. But in the first instance, I think what might be really helpful is just to explore a little bit about what we mean by ESG and what it means to us in our different organisations. And I think to do that, let's start with some opening remarks from you, Timothy, a fellow Timothy. I'm Timothy Williamson from Telum Media. Can you tell us a little bit also about what ESG means for Farrer Park Hospital as well? Great. You've got one. Yes. Got one.
Yeah, thanks, Tim to Tim. Well, I come from healthcare, but the facility that I run is modeled with a 5-star hotel called One Farrer Hotel, Farrer Park Hospital, and Farrer Park Specialist Medical Center. So it's 3 in 1. The whole building is it's called Connection. So this is a healthcare or hospitality, or sometimes you call it hospital, right? It is not only, I mean, the hospital is not only for, the hotel is not only for caregivers. It's a 5-star business hotel. Yeah, so basically for healthcare, we're looking at a sustainable healthcare system for the building itself, because healthcare is an effort towards preventive health now and going towards wellness. If you hear the Singapore government going for preventive health and wellness, so the Ministry of Health is not called Ministry of Sickness, it's Ministry of Health. So going towards preventive and wellness. The building itself, I mean, just to give you an idea of ESG and sustainability, it's a 10-year-old building, thereabouts, and during the planning stage, we have actually put in sustainability, architecture, design into the building 10 years back, or more than 10 years back when the planning was in place. So we know that climate change is a challenge now. We know that we need to decrease carbon footprint. And how do we cool the building down? If you look at the building, if you've been there, you see this colorful sunshades. It's actually purposely built that way, such that you will reflect the heat out from the building. The colorful sunshades are actually the specialist medical center. It reflects, and also it also ventilates the building in such an angle whereby our 15 gardens. We have 15 gardens within the building itself. You don't see it unless you are in it. And an urban farm. So putting nature into the building is called biophilic, for the love of nature, bringing nature close to humans, right? Healing. So those are some of the things that we have put in place with Farrer Park and One Farrer Hotel. Of course, the water water irrigation system, we collect rain water in such a way that we can irrigate our 15 gardens so it doesn't go to waste. Our piping has been put in place such that it is ready for new water. You know, Singapore is doing new water. Yeah, so it is ready for new water to be used for the building. So that was all planned actually more than 10 years back, before even the building was put in place.
And if I might ask you, why were those decisions made? How integral was that? Because it sounds pretty fundamental to the planning process. Why was that?
We felt that, the chairman had the foresight that it's something that we needed to do, and that's why that was planned then. Even the building was actually planned for a pandemic. Hospital, it was planned for a pandemic, not knowing that we're actually going through a pandemic, right? We can immediately switch the hotel to an area where we can hold people. And of course, when borders are closed, no visitors, right? Whatever Singaporeans, locals, we can just quickly switch. So it's foresight planning in terms of making it foolproof for the next 20 years. A smart hospital, smart hotel integrated into one. so that we can, survive the sustainable building. Because healthcare needs to be sustainable. We are caring for people in generations to come. Of course, the building won't last generations, but the concept will. And of course, it will continue to improve and generate what needs to be generated going forward.
Turning to you, Dr. Frank, we heard there about how building design with environmental characteristics can be a part of the wellness process and future-proof a business. When you're working with businesses around the world, I mean, how do you think about ESG? What is the approach, and what do you talk about?
Thanks, Tim. As Dr. Timothy mentioned just now, foresight planning, I think, is extremely important to envision and to shape the future, and always having ESG in mind. And that's exactly what we are doing. We host large-scale summits for entrepreneurs and governments, and it's all about ESG. And actually, I'm very glad that we got the ESGs, because ESGs, they come from business originally. It's not like the UN setting forward a new system similar to the SDGs, but it's really coming bottom up. And originally, some businessmen came up with the idea of putting the E, the S, and the G into one line, and not just talking about the E. The E is kind of a very natural thing. We all talk about fighting climate change, and we sometimes forget the S and the G. Think about, and we talked about it this morning, Garrett, about Tesla. And when Elon Musk heard that Tesla is being kicked out by one of the indices, he was very angry. But it's clear, right? He was very much focusing on the E, and we are all glad that we got these electric cars. But we shouldn't forget that it's also a societal issue, and that's, of course, a governance issue. What is missing right now is maybe the metrics behind, how to measure it. And there's so many different ways to measure it. And, one proposal I have, and that's something we discussed at Horasis, is to define a new system for measurement which is accepted by everybody across all geographies. And it's maybe, one important project to work on. Maybe just the last point. I feel there's a bit of a hype going on ESGs, a bit like CSR some 10, 15, 20 years ago. And if there's a hype, there's always the danger of a bubble bursting in the future. And that's something definitely we should avoid. And we should avoid all kind of greenwashing. When you check out the websites of all large companies these days, they put the ESG like was the first thing. And I doubt really that, many understand really what ESG means. And, this greenwashing is so dangerous because it will put in question the whole system. And here again, Horasis as an organization is very much involved how to avoid greenwashing, how to also build private-public partnerships to help companies to achieve this goal.
Thank you. And Rob, you come at things slightly differently with Regenerate. Do you want to tell us a bit about what Regenerate does and how you approach this issue?
Sure. From a personal background, I should probably give the context. I've spent the last 13 years somewhat assuaging for the guilt of my early career as an army officer in the British Army, and then working for families from a 13th generation UK aristocratic family with sustainability embedded in a lot of things they do, through to a first generation South African entrepreneur, and the last 8 years as an entrepreneur in combination with a fourth generation British family and working with other families globally. Regenerate comes out of a personal conviction. Sort of when I landed in Singapore 5 years ago, one of the first things that I was lucky enough to do was take my son to Bintan for a weekend, and I just looked at the abject destruction that we were inflicting upon the beaches, the biodiversity there. And Regenerate, what we're building with Regenerate is a platform for connectivity, for investors, for entrepreneurs, for corporate actions around predominantly the E space, but also the E space affects the S and the G. And if I can just give you a few statistics, I can see some very august luminaries of the ESG space in this room that I see around Singapore's conference scene, and I feel a bit of a fraud being on this panel, but $270 trillion is the opportunity by 2030 to invest in man-made climate change. We should raise that point. It is man-made. It's not just happening, it's man-made. And the $44 trillion opportunity is investing in biodiversity protection and restoring biodiversity. And to give you some examples, we were discussing prior to this food supply. In a small country like Singapore that is largely reliant on food imports and is working towards methodologies around vertical farming, food supply is a critical issue. Healthcare. Around 25% of all drugs produced come with some form of plant extract in them. 70% of our insects and reptile populations have been impacted by biodiversity loss, and they are intrinsically important. Your Excellency, Dutch Ambassador, we would have no Dutch tulips without insects. So there are so many different reasons why biodiversity protection, it's a large market opportunity. It's an opportunity that we can all have something to do with. And I was at another conference this week, and a family office CIO spoke up and he said, look, perhaps we'll realise that when we get to the point that it's no longer just about protecting the earth, but it's about protecting ourselves, because we're not going to wipe out the earth. The earth will outlive us, and the earth will regenerate itself, but we will become extinct if we don't do something about it. And that's what we seek to work towards through Regenerate, by creating activism, creating a platform for connectivity, and by investing through an investment fund that we're raising as well.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Now, Sunam, you are Sunam Sarkar, Chief Business Officer at Apollo Tyres. You're a successful, I assume, hard-headed businessman. What does ESG mean to you? What's the business case for ESG?
Something told me you'd ask me that question, and I got a couple of lines which I think really answer that very well. So if you'll permit me, I'll quote. This is from Larry Fink's annual letter to CEOs. And the two lines I'd like to quote are, purpose is not the sole pursuit of profits, but the animating force for achieving them. And the second one is, profits are in no way inconsistent with purpose. In fact, profits and purpose are inextricably linked. At Apollo, we think it's really, the bottom line is all about responsibility. And as Rob said, we are responsible for climate change, we as mankind. Our industry is not the most environmentally friendly industry. A lot of our raw materials are carbon derivatives, carbon fuel derivatives. So what can we do to take responsibility and make changes in our business models? We went ahead and put solar energy in one of our largest factories. Today, 50% of our power consumption is fully solar, and we are very proud of something like that. Even more than that, we started measuring ourselves and publishing our business responsibility report in 2010, well before it was mandatory for companies in India to do something like that, because it really comes from an internal view that we are responsible for what we are doing, and we have to make sure that the ecosystem in which we operate is going to be there for us to operate in the future.
So we heard there about ensuring that the ecosystem is maintained so that you have a business for the future. We also heard there about the pull from the big investors like BlackRock, who've been taking a leadership, or at least talking about ESG a lot in their media and in their letters. So we have the pull coming from shareholders as well as consumers and employees and others who all are looking for that sort of purpose and sense of ESG. Can I ask you a question, actually, in regards, Timothy, to the hospital, Farrer Park? How aware, how much ESG principles kind of inculcated across the organisation? How do you drive, if you like, the vision and the values across a business which is, as you say, it's about healthcare, it's about wellness, but how much do employees have to buy into what you're doing?
Well, the infrastructure is in place. The education is something that we need to enhance. Although, the water, the air, it's being sort of purified with the UV. When you go into the building, actually the air that you breathe in connection, it's actually been UV purified. So we cut down pathogens that is in the air. Staff may not know that. So we actually need to educate people in terms of the air, the lighting, the irrigation, the plants, what it means to them. And for the Generation Z at least, they actually want to work in a company or an organization where they know ESG is in place. We even get, because we have a hotel, so we even get people asking us whether the hotel is green in terms of its usage of reusable materials, in terms of whether it's green. So if not, they won't book. So since 2011, the building has been given a Green Mark Platinum certified. So it's just renewed last year, and we need to show that we save at least 30% of energy and cut down on waste. So these we have not been doing a very good job in educating our staff, but I think that's the next stage where, besides providing good health care, good outcomes, good care for the patients, we need to also inculcate that you are working in a place where it's green, it's sustainable, and we have ESG in mind.
Now, we said earlier, we talked about having measurements and having real regulatory requirements, or the frameworks that help people understand ESG and hold ESG to account. It also feels that at the moment we are seeing regulators taking action around ESG claims and greenwashing. And it sometimes feels that every other day a commentator is predicting the demise of ESG. Can we put that to rest? Is it here to stay?
Well, it's here to stay, I guess, and it's a discussion going on right now, and the question really is who should take charge? Who's a regulator? Is it just a country? Is it a continent? Is it the UN? And I think the jury is still out there. But let me first comment on the point you made before on the business world now working with ESG and maybe the transformation of capitalism. And I believe that we are moving from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And it's not only the shareholder alone deciding on the future of a company, but it's the whole ecosystem behind. And it's not Milton Friedman's view saying it's like, the bottom line is what really counts, the profit. But it's much more. It's maybe a triple bottom line, if you wish. And maybe my second point to what Tim said before, and if you look into the measurement as well, and I think we really need to measure. There's no way we can just say, we're doing all ESG stuff, but it has to be measured. There has to be control. And finally, I think only companies which comply to ESG standards will also receive capital. I think, those who are not going in this direction will just, fall off the cliff and might go bankrupt. I think, my prediction in the next maybe 4 to 5 years, this will happen. And there will be a run on ESG standards, right? Everybody wants to do it because they want to stay alive. And it's a good thing. And, with the point I made before, ESG really comes from the business world. It's not imposed by the UN. And it's a good thing.
And Rob, when it comes to really game-changing innovations and rethinking the way that we actually conduct ourselves and the way that we look after the planet, is ESG going to get us to where we need to go? Is it, or is it just another tagline?
So, I think the key distinction that I want to make is, I see myself as an impact activist, impact investor. I think ESG is focused more on mitigation for the last 5 to 10 years, and I'm very focused on positive future impact. Now, coming to the question of measurement, it's quite difficult to measure a future impact. The world isn't built, forgive me for saying this, but the world isn't built on governments or regulators or laws. The world is built on entrepreneurship and innovation. Sunam works for a large corporate business, but from family business foundations. An entrepreneur founded that. every small business is founded by an entrepreneur. And if you look back to the era of the 60s space race, it used to be that governments played in innovation. They don't. Elon Musk plays in innovation. He is leading the space race today. We can claw ourselves out of the hole we're in, but it will take innovators and entrepreneurs. And so I firmly believe that we have to take on a bit of a risk mindset, and we have to tell ourselves and say, we could spend forever being convinced by false accounting and confusing standards and alphabety spaghetti around ESG, or we could focus on the problem at hand and go, we're going to do something about it. And, as this gentleman who works for a large Singaporean family office said the other day, there is nothing in humankind's history where we've really set our mind to solving a problem where we haven't achieved it. And that's why I have a deep-rooted belief. Now, it's not to say that it's not difficult to get people to part with their money for early-stage investment. But I think that we live in unprecedented times with dislocation in public markets, lots of pressures, inflationary pressures and everything else, pressures on food supply, war in Ukraine, so many factors that make people nervous. And that's why I think that it's a field day for commentators who want to detract from the ESG narrative and say it's just a fad. You can't be distracted when a real innovator comes forward and comes up with a real solution and gets buy-in. And, all we're hoping to do is to create the environment whereby we can get the early stage risk capitalists to come in alongside us, be it families, be it venture capitalists, be it angels, but we can also create the environment where we can create a sense of comfort for the big corporates to then be able to say, okay, we get it, we'll try it, we'll work with you, and then we'll give you capital. We'll be your customer, or we'll buy into your investment.
And so you only have to look at the Apollo website to see the vision and values and to see the CSR initiatives that the company undertakes. How important are these initiatives to the company and the company's culture? How beneficial? Is there a beneficial element to that as well?
Yes, absolutely. It's completely critical to our existence, as I mentioned earlier. And I think Dr. Frank made the correct point. It's no longer about shareholders only. It's about stakeholders. And we've always approached, whether it's our social responsibility or our sustainability initiatives, from the perspective of all stakeholders. Dr. Lowe mentioned employees want to work in organizations which are doing the responsible thing, because the new generation of people are themselves very responsible. So it's absolutely fundamentally critical to the strategy of the business to be able to not just comply, but to set standards of ESG.
Thank you. Now, does anybody in the audience have any questions for any of the panelists?
One thing that's always miffed me is that it's so cold in buildings over here, and more than half the energy used by a building is actually in air conditioning. So just like we have these global goals of reducing temperatures by 1.5 degrees, why don't we take on goals about saying what internal temperatures in buildings ought to be? That should really solve a big part of what our environmental challenge might be. I mean, the US Department of Energy states that comfortable indoor temperatures should be between 75 to 78 degrees, which is 23 to 24 degrees centigrade. Temperatures here, and I can guess, probably set at 19 degrees at the moment. Your hospital's probably set at 16 or 17. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think, like what the food industry has done, right? If you go to buy a muffin at Starbucks, it tells you a 100-gram muffin is 320 calories, and so many of us urge, or kind of that resist that temptation to go and reach out for it. But if you went to same thing like a clothing store and said this pair of Levi's jeans has used up 2,000 liters of water in its manufacturing process, why don't we start to do those kind of labeling, etc.? So just a couple of questions, your indulgence.
I'll just give a few examples. It's not 16 degrees, maybe in the operating theatre, yeah? Well, in the operating theatre, we need it to be cold because of the equipment, and equipment generates heat. So But outside the operating theatre, it is actually at a comfortable 23-24 degrees centigrade. And within the building itself, we do not use that much energy to cool the building down, because, as I said, we planned it with a sunshade that reflects light off. We do not use that many lights because the building is glass like that. What you see, glass, which means we use a lot of natural light that comes in. Right? Singapore is hot, so we use the heat and the humidity within the air, and we have this energy wheel within the building itself. We capture the heat and the humidity and change it into cool air streams. So the infrastructure has to be planned beforehand and put in place so that we cool the internal of the building without using that much energy. And of course, measurement is needed. That's why we need to show that at least we save 30% of energy every year. Otherwise, we won't continue to be Platinum Green Mark certified.
Yeah, just add a point. In Switzerland, where I'm based, and actually the whole of Europe, there's now a heat wave. And we are reaching around 38 degrees. The good thing is we are just using natural air conditioning, just open the window. But, there's been a discussion actually going on if, of course, now with the impact of the war in Ukraine, what should be done, right, in terms of energy and maybe, in winter, of course, for us, the winter is crucial, not so much the summer. What shall we do, in terms of heating? And there's now a discussion going on that we should all economize and maybe, just lowering the average temperature. And I think that's the right way to do. I think we've been spoiled too much in the past, always the same temperature. And we should go maybe for more like a natural life and living with the seasons.
Fabulous. Any other questions?
Good evening, everyone. This is Sukalp. I'm from GHT, which is a near 100-old engineering services organization. So ESG is very central to the way we think about all assets, be it construction, be it mining, be it water, and property, transportation, and whatnot. I'm an engineer myself, and I can't stop myself from thinking about ESG at times and extending the thinking that, roughly the 80-20 rule applies to everything, right? So, which means that 20% or 80% of the problem can be solved with 20% of the solutions. Extending it to ESG, do you think there's any low-hanging fruit, anything obvious which we can do, or which is out there, which can help address a big part of the problem?
Look, I'll say this with the deepest of respect for the many great business people who've built businesses in all sorts of domains. And we were discussing earlier, I think I'm a British expat in Singapore. There has been a legacy and history of foreign countries either appropriating, imperially ruling, or extending their power to Southeast Asia. And it would be wrong, we recognised tens of years ago, decades ago, that it was wrong to continue that. And it is wrong for Western democratic business leaders to push their values and standards upon people in Southeast Asia. So, for instance, let's take one of the largest foundations in the world, the Rockefeller Foundation, founded on oil money, now driving the climate agenda, driving the philanthropy agenda. However, to turn around to a second-generation Malaysian or Indonesian palm plantation family that's built their wealth in palm plantations and say, well, because the brands that we've built in Unilever and Procter & Gamble in the West now say that palm is unacceptable, you guys have got to change your business models, but you've only had 25 years to build your businesses. We had 125 years, and for 100 of those years, no one said anything about the fact that oil was bad. Now you're very bad. I think the low-hanging fruit is really to focus on biodiversity restoration. We have a huge opportunity. I saw a photo from a friend. I used to live in Dubai, and I saw a photo from a friend who was flying over the DRC at 10,000 feet yesterday. And he said, there's a real problem here because there's over a trillion hectares of equatorial rainforest that is currently being slated by the DRC government to be chopped down so that we can mine for rare earths to provide for the EV and renewables boom. Something intrinsically wrong about that. We have such an infinite capacity as human beings to innovate and to think around problems, and that's what we need to do. But we need to start by restoring the biodiversity that we've destroyed, because we've seen from mangrove restoration in Indonesia, we've seen from rainforest restoration that, coming to the question about cooling buildings, you can cool an entire city, you can cool an entire country by 1 or 2 degrees by planting trees in urban areas. It's, if you haven't seen it, there's a frequently posted, LinkedIn meme or whatever it's called, which says the area in the shade is 1 to 2 degrees cooler, and all you've got to do is watch what animals do in the natural habitat. If you put animals in a field of large wind turbines, and the large wind turbine is the only shade, the sheep in that field will seek out the shade of the large wind turbine. So why not plant lower trees in a field of very high wind turbines? It seems such a natural opportunity to do so, and there are so many opportunities around that. It's not just agriculture and biodiversity. There are technologies that can help us with this as well, and I think we can invest in those as well, but we also have to think long term. We have to think about not how can I solve things just by great idea, switch down the air conditioning or switch it up, turn it up a few degrees, but how can I solve for the 10 years and the 20 years and the 30 years? Because businesses like Apollo, they're built on 70 plus years foundations. The businesses I've worked for, 300 years foundations. They will only continue by continuing to innovate, and we have to innovate to get out of the crisis we face.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we've just scratched the surface really, and it's obviously such a multifaceted and broad topic for conversation, but I hope that's given some people some pause for thought and reflection.